The night market terrace on Sky Tier seemed clean at first glance. All gleaming glass floors scrubbed by drones. Neon signage trimmed to a regulated glow and polished steel rails free of rust. But beneath that surface perfection, the wind cut sharp and wet, knifing through thin wraps and chilling every exposed patch of skin. And Nur felt every gust as her daughter Erie shivered against her hip. The turbines roared below the walkway, their deep vibration pressing up through her bare feet like a reminder of the city's power. While around her, people hurried with Freund seed coffee steaming in their hands. Skewers of Draxan meat dripping over paper trays, all too wrapped in their own comfort to notice a mother whose child's lips were tinged blue. Nur stopped at the heated stall where emergency blankets glowed faintly behind the glass slot, a life-saving promise only accessible with an active code she did not have. She pressed her palm to the panel, her voice shaking as she pleaded with the vendor to release one on credit, promising to work the next day, to pay, to do anything. But his rehearsed response came cold and final. No active code, no release. The words struck like steel across her chest, and as she felt Erie's trembling deepen, desperation broke through the walls of dignity she had clung to for days. The offer left her mouth before she could pull it back, louder than she thought, hanging in the damp air like a blade. One night with me, for one blanket. Silence rippled across the terrace as the words dropped. Shoppers slowing, a cup clattering against the rail, wrist lenses tilting upward as recording lights flickered red. And Nur's shame hit hot under the cold, twisting her stomach as she pulled her daughter closer, wishing she could bury both of them into the floor. Erie pressed her face against her side, too young to understand the full weight of her mother's bargain, but old enough to feel the terror in her bones. Cale Riven had been standing only a few meters away, a human waiting for his coffee to cool, his posture relaxed but alert, his gaze sweeping the crowd with a habit born of years drilling calm into Marines who froze under fire. He didn't think, didn't weigh, didn't measure her words against consequence. He moved before the rest of the terrace caught its breath, sliding credits across the counter, pulling the blanket free, and kneeling before the trembling child. With practiced precision, he wrapped the heated fabric around Erie's shoulders, tucking the corners under her chin so the warmth sealed in and her wide, startled eyes blinked up at him as though she had never been seen before. Rising, he stripped his graphite field jacket and set it firmly across Nur's shoulders. A weight of warmth she clutched in disbelief as if it might vanish any second. His voice carried low but steady, not loud, not threatening, but with a command that came from a place no one wanted to test. No one post this. And one by one, the wrists lowered, the recording stopped, the hum of the terrace resuming in uneven ripples. Nur's throat burned with the shame she had already spoken into existence, yet tangled inside it now was confusion, fragile relief, and fresh fear. Why had this man stepped into her humiliation? What did he expect in return? She stood rigid in the jacket, holding her daughter, who whispered faintly, "My thumbs don't hurt anymore," and Cale simply nodded, his answer as blunt and certain as his action. That's the point. In that moment, Nur was introduced not only as a mother clawing through desperation, but as one who would stain herself with shame to keep her daughter breathing, while Cale revealed himself in the space between hesitation and choice, not savior, not hero, but a disciplined protector whose instinct was to carry weight others dropped. No matter whose shoulders bore it first, the terrace had not yet swallowed the tension when the marshal arrived. His uniform crisp, boots striking the glass with authority, his eyes sweeping past Cale to fix on Nair with a kind of practiced neutrality that left no room for hope. "Madam, step aside. Unsanctioned propositioning violates city code. I'll need your ID for record," he said, his stylus hovering over the slate, already primed to mark her life into something unclean. And Nur's stomach clenched because she knew what that meant. No ward shelter. No food lines, no heat, not even for Irie. She clutched her daughter tighter, her throat choking on words she could not form. But before her panic could drown her, Cale shifted just enough that the marshal's line of sight met only his shoulders. His voice came calm, deliberate, like someone explaining a simple correction. She asked for credit. She was refused. I paid. It ends there. The marshal's stylus hung in the air, but his training pushed him on. Her words triggered a report. Cale set his empty coffee cup on the vendor's counter, spreading his hands slightly, palms open but firm, his tone flattening into something sharper. You also saw a child about to freeze 6 meters from a heater. Write that in your report. Then close it. The silence stretched, brittle, until the marshal tapped once, issuing only a verbal caution before turning away. And the crowd, sensing the moment had dissolved, drifted back to their stalls, some embarrassed, others relieved to look elsewhere. Erie's small voice broke through the air, muffled but piercing. Sir, if you write my mom's name, do heaters stop working for us? The marshal faltered, coughed, and shook his head. No, heaters work for everyone. Erie pulled the blanket tighter around herself, her voice small but unyielding. Then write heaters. The man hesitated before leaving, and in that fragile victory, Nur's chest heaved with a new mix of relief and dread. She turned to Cale, her voice rough, almost breaking. I made the offer. The shame is mine, not yours. He met her gaze with that same steady calm that unnerved her. You'll carry your daughter. I'll carry the rest. His words struck heavier than the jacket on her shoulders, heavier than the blanket on her child, because they carried no condition. No bargain, no hunger, just certainty, and it terrified her more than scorn. Cale scanned the terrace again, his eyes cutting along stall edges, patrol routes, blind corners, then nodded toward a narrow service door. Come on, there's a better place to talk. Nur hesitated, her pride screaming that this was another trap, another cost waiting to be collected. But she looked at his movements, precise and protective, at the way he had not once looked at her body with the gaze she feared, only at her daughter with focus. And finally she nodded, clutching Erie tighter. Cale pushed the door open with a steady hand, and as they slipped into the dim, warmer corridor, the sterile hum of the terrace fell away, leaving only the sound of dripping pipes and the faint exhale of heated vents. And Nur's heart pounded with the fear that this path might save them, or consume them. The corridor stretched longer than Nur expected, pipes humming overhead and dripping condensation that echoed softly in the dim light. The floor-grated steel beneath their bare steps warmer than the glass walkways above. The air smelled of metal polish and heat, a scent both industrial and strangely comforting compared to the sterile bite outside. Cale moved slightly ahead, his posture loose, but his gaze flicking to door seams, corners, pressure valves, as if he had walked this path 100 times and catalogued every shadow. Erie clutched the blanket close, her little face peeking out just enough to whisper, It doesn't smell like outside anymore. And Cale gave a small nod without slowing. That's why I use these roots. Nur's hand trembled on her daughter's shoulder as her mind spun. Why was he helping? What did he want? What trap waited at the end of this passage? She studied his back, the straight line of his shoulders, the way his fingers brushed the wall now and then in silent checks, and broke the silence with a sharp question she hated herself for. Who are you, really? Cale slowed but didn't turn, his voice even. Logistics auditor. I inspect pylons, record flow rates, file reports. Before that military training division. Nur's voice came rough, defensive. And why us? You could have walked away like everyone else. Kale glanced back briefly, unreadable in the yellow light, because your daughter was shaking. That's enough. The words landed like stone, unadorned, unembellished, leaving no space for doubt, and Nur found she had none to argue with. Eerie, small and unafraid in the way children sometimes are, piped up again. Do heaters really stop working if they write our names down? Nur froze, her throat dry, but Kale's answer came softer, almost for the girl alone. No, heaters don't care about names. People do. That's why I said no one posts. Names can do more harm than cold. Eerie seemed to accept this, her head nodding drowsily against Nur's chest. But Nur's gaze sharpened on Kale, unsettled by how his discipline carved through fear like a blade. The stairwell at the end groaned as he tested the rail, then ushered them upward, his movements deliberate, scanning the silence as if unseen dangers pressed from every angle. At the top, another panel hissed open to reveal a quieter level, residential, dimmer, cleaner. The turbine's roar softened into a steady thrum. Kale looked back at them properly for the first time, his eyes lingering on Nur's face, then on the bundle of child wrapped against her. You can stay until morning, he said plainly. After that, decide what you want. The simplicity unsettled her more than a demand ever could. Her pride told her to distrust, but her body sagged with exhaustion. Her arms ached from carrying Eerie alone, and now, impossibly, someone else was carrying part of that weight. She nodded once, unable to find words, and followed him toward the door that might open into either sanctuary or another cage. Kale's microflat opened with a soft hiss, warm air spilling into the dim corridor, and Nur hesitated at the threshold, clutching Eerie tighter, as if the small body in her arms could shield her from what waited inside. But the room was nothing like the dens she had been dragged through before it was small. Yes, but ordered, stainless counters gleaming, folded clothes stacked in precise rows, a single mug on the drying rack, a rolled mat against the wall, and a wide glass pane looking out over endless mist with turbines like dark spines cutting through the clouds. Eerie's eyes widened, her tired voice whispering, "It smells like food in here," though the air only carried faint traces of polish and warm pipes. And Kale set his bag down with efficient movements, pulling a pan from a drawer and filling it with water as though feeding strangers was part of a daily routine. Nur stayed rigid by the door, still wrapped in his jacket, suspicion sharpening every glance. But when he set a small coil under a cup of nectar and slid it toward Eerie before she even asked, her daughter's shoulders eased, and the tight knot in Nur's chest twisted with something she hadn't felt in weeks' uncertain relief. Kale chopped dried verin root threads and drained mushrooms with precise, economical cuts, his silence deliberate, never filling the air with questions or promises. And when he set bowls before them, Nur could not stop the tremor in her hands as she lifted the food, heat spreading through her chest as if shame and hunger were wrestling in her veins. At last her voice broke, low and defensive. "Why didn't you hand us to the clerks? One signature, and we'd be gone from your floor." Kale stirred his own bowl without looking up, his reply flat but weighted. "Because they'd have written your names. And names here stick longer than scars." The words cut her deeper than she expected, because they carried the truth she lived with every day. And before she could hide her reaction, he added, "Military records don't vanish. You learn to live with them. Doesn't mean I want a child to carry the same." His admission struck her silent, and when she glanced at Eerie slurping nectar noisily, crumbs on her chin, the girl grinned at Kale and said brightly, "Only one cup? Then you need 2 more. One for Mom, one for me." Nur's throat tightened in dread of overstepping, but Kale simply nodded, his reply as simple as it was disarming. "I'll get them tomorrow." Something shifted in the air. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and heavy, like the moment a turbine changed pitch. Later, when Eerie drifted into sleep, Kale lifted her gently, his large hands startlingly careful as he laid her on the mat, then returned to the table where Ner sat clutching the repaired wrap he had mended with soldier's precision. Her voice cracked, half ashamed, half demanding, "Why didn't you look at me like the others did?" Kale's answer came steady, unblinking, "Because you weren't offering yourself. You were trying to keep her warm." Anyone who saw more than that was looking wrong. The truth of it left her breathless, her pride and her shame colliding in silence, while the turbines hummed outside, steady and indifferent. And inside the flat, the first fragile weight of trust began to take root. The knock came just as Ner began to believe the silence might finally be safe, polite but firm against the metal door. And Kale was on his feet before the second rap, his body tightening into stillness, the kind that spoke of years trained to move only when sure. He slid the panel open a fraction, his frame filling the gap, and on the threshold stood two compliance clerks in gray, their smiles neutral, slates held like extensions of their hands. "Random residency audit," one said smoothly. "Please confirm your occupants." Ner's breath caught, her grip on Eerie's sleeping form clutching tighter, and shame burned again in her chest. This was the end, the record catching up to crush them. But Kale's voice came steady, level, as he stepped fully into the doorway. "Kale Riven, registered alone. Tonight I have 2 guests under care." The clerk's brows flicked in unison, one replying with rehearsed courtesy. "Care guests require ward registration." Kale didn't flinch, didn't glance back at Ner, only said with iron certainty, "They're under my bond. My responsibility until further notice." He slid his ident card across the slate, and the soft beep of recognition filled the flat like a gunshot. The clerks hesitated at the mark that flashed across the screen veteran status, and exchanged a glance, one trying again with a gentle edge. Ward housing would be safer, easier to monitor, less risk of unrecorded incidents. Kale's eyes narrowed, his tone never rising, but each word sharp enough to cut. Ward housing would also submit the citation from earlier tonight. "I won't allow that. My bond stands." Silence stretched, thin and brittle, while Ner sat frozen in her chair. The repaired wrap bunched in her hands, Eerie stirring faintly in her sleep, murmuring, "Don't let them take us, Mom." At last, the clerk handed back the card with a clipped nod. "Noted. Guests temporary under your bond." Kale accepted it with the same controlled calm, shut the door with deliberate care, locked it twice, then turned back into the room. Ner rose on trembling legs, her voice breaking with disbelief. "You just put your name on us. If something happens, it happens to you first." Kale cut in before she could spiral further, his tone low but unshakable. "That's the point of a bond." The words landed like a weight she could not lift, pressing deeper than shame, heavier than debt, because no one in her life had ever claimed her protection without a price. She stared at him across the dim flat, her chest tightening with the dangerous spark of something she had almost forgotten, what it felt like when safety wasn't an illusion. And as Eerie curled deeper into sleep, clutching the repaired wrap like treasure, Ner whispered into the silence, not for him, not for herself, but because the truth refused to stay hidden. "I don't remember the last time anyone claimed me for protection instead of use." Kale didn't answer. He didn't need to. His steady presence filled the space with more certainty than words, and the turbines outside carried on their endless thrum, indifferent, while inside the small flat something new had taken root, fragile but undeniable, like the first warmth after a long freeze. Morning light seeped pale blue through the wide glass wall, mist churning over the cloud belt below, the turbines groaning their steady rhythm as if the city's heart never faltered. And Nur woke to the strange sensation of stillness. For the first few breaths she did not move, her body wrapped in Kale's heavy jacket. Eerie curled against her side beneath the repaired wrap. And it took time to remember that no one had dragged them away in the night, that the knock at the door had not shattered their fragile refuge. She shifted her gaze toward the table where Kale already sat, posture straight, mug in hand, dressed in a clean shirt and slacks, hair damp as if washed in hurried discipline, and the sight of him unnerved her more than any threat because it spoke of routine, of a man who had no room for softness, yet chose to carve out space for them anyway. The smell of browning nectar batter reached her, sweet tongue rising with a dash of pepper oil, and she pushed herself up slowly, watching as he turned pancakes with the same precision he used to scan corridors. "You cook?" she asked before she could stop herself, and he only shrugged, his voice even. Enough to stay alive. Nur hated the way her hunger betrayed her, how her voice softened when she admitted, "It smells like a feast." Kale plated food without comment, setting one portion aside for Eerie before she stirred, and placed another before Nur with no ceremony. Just a simple command, "Eat." She hesitated, suspicion clashing with need. But the first bite spread warmth through her chest, and she blinked back tears she would not let fall, because food without bargain felt more dangerous than hunger. Kale ate quietly across from her, not lingering on her face, not pressing her with questions, but his awareness sat steady between them like a shield. And for the first time in years, Nur found silence that did not mean judgment. Eerie woke with a sleepy grin, sliding to the table, and Kale wordlessly placed the plate before her, poured nectar into a smaller cup, and pushed a napkin close when she made crumbs of everything, his patience disarming Nur more than any promise could. When the child reminded him, bright and certain, "You said we need 3 cups now," Kale's reply was immediate, "I'll get them today. I keep my word." And Eerie nodded proudly, as though she had tested and confirmed the truth of him. Nur lowered her gaze, hiding the dangerous warmth rising in her chest. After breakfast, when Kale inspected her wrap and declared softly, "The seam will hold, but the fabric won't last long," his fingers brushed near her hip, and the closeness sent an unexpected current through her. He withdrew instantly out of respect, but the air thickened with something unsaid, heavy as the turbine hum pressing through the floor. Eerie yawned, drooping against her mother, and Kale lifted her again with startling gentleness, tucking her back beneath the wrap as if he had done it 1,000 times. His scarred hands moving with care not learned in war, but born from something deeper. Nur's voice cracked then, fear and disbelief tangling in her throat. "You don't even know what I've done before, what I carry. You don't know why I have no code, no name worth writing." Kale's reply came low, steady, unshaken. "I don't need to. You're here now. That's enough." She swallowed hard, tears finally cutting free, because no one had ever answered her shame with such finality. She whispered, "You don't realize what you're taking on." Kale stepped closer, not looming but filling the air with solid certainty. "I know exactly what I'm taking on, and I'm not walking away." For a heartbeat the silence trembled, charged, and then he moved to the drawer, slid it open, and placed a clean child's mug beside his own, as if it had always belonged there. Nur's breath caught at the sight, no bargain, no demand, just space made for them without question. She stepped forward, her hands trembling as she tied the vendor's thermal scarf once around his wrist, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then you belong to us now." Kale didn't flinch, didn't waver, only let the knot rest against his skin. His reply certain, unshaken, "I already do." Outside, the turbines roared against the wind, the city carrying on with its indifferent rhythm. But inside the flat, the air grew still, heavy with a fragile bond sealed not by law or bargain, but by choice. And for the first time in years, Nur let herself believe in the dangerous shape of a home. The day outside the glass wall was pale and endless. Clouds drifting in slow tides across the sky tier. Turbines turning with their steady thunder. But inside Kale's flat, the air felt suspended. Fragile and heavy, with something unspoken. Nur sat by the window, brushing the last tangles from her damp white hair, Kale's oversized shirt loose around her shoulders. Her daughter curled on the mat, with the scarf wound snug around her neck. For a long time, Nur only watched, listening to Erie's soft breathing, the scrape of Kale's spoon against the pan, the faint hum of power lines running through the walls. And the longer she listened, the more the silence unnerved her. Because it wasn't empty. It was safe. She had forgotten what safe felt like. Kale moved with his precise rhythm, cleaning dishes, folding the mat, his every motion efficient and quiet. But when he finally set a second mug of coffee across from her, his eyes lingered a heartbeat too long, and Nur's chest tightened with a fear she didn't want to name. "You still don't ask anything," she said softly, a challenge tangled in her voice. "And that makes no sense." Kale sat across from her, his elbows resting on the table, his tone calm but absolute. "It makes sense to me. You and your daughter needed warmth. That's enough." Nur dropped her gaze, her hand curling tight around the mug, the heat seeping into her skin, because his certainty left her nowhere to hide. Erie stirred on the mat, blinking up at them with messy hair, her small voice croaking through sleep. "Can we stay here forever?" Nur froze, her throat locking, fear clawing her insides, because forever was a word she had never trusted. She looked at Kale instead, her eyes searching for the catch. The price, but his gaze was steady, his voice low, measured. "For as long as you need." Erie smiled faintly and drifted back to sleep, satisfied. But Nur's heart thundered, because the ground beneath her had shifted again. She rose, pacing toward the counter, her hands shaking as she pulled the scarf from her daughter's neck, turning the fabric over and over in her fingers. "You put your name on us," she whispered, almost to herself. "You could lose everything if this goes wrong." Kale's reply came without hesitation. As steady as the turbines outside, I decided that risk the moment I stepped forward. "I won't change it now." Nur's eyes burned, tears threatening, but pride made her voice sharp. "You don't even know who I am, what I've done, how far I've fallen." Kale stood, closing the space between them, not looming but unshakably present, his scar catching the pale light as he answered, "I don't need to. You're here. You're hers. That's all that matters." Nur's breath caught, the scarf slipping through her fingers, and for a dangerous heartbeat she let herself believe him. The turbines groaned in their endless rhythm, but the flat seemed to pulse with something deeper, heavier, a bond chosen not by law or bargain, but by will. Nur tied the scarf around his wrist once more, tighter this time, her voice trembling. "Then don't walk away." Kale's answer came quiet but certain, a vow as much as a truth. "I won't." The silence after was not fragile anymore, it was full, charged, the first steps of a home none of them had dared imagine.